Well, welcome to our new format, which is the International Crimes Investigative Committee. We have covered a lot of ground in the original version of the Corona Committee. We did more or less stick to Corona, however. There are more topics that need to be covered, but today we're going to extend the view into the Corona pandemic a little further, because thus far most people have been talking about the damage. Most people on our side of the fence in the resistance have been talking about the damage that has been done by the so-called vaccines, which, as we all know, are not vaccines. They're neither necessary, they're neither safe, nor are they even effective. But there is one aspect which I was alerted to by my friend Professor Sucharit Bhakdi a few weeks ago when he and I gave a presentation in support of Greek healthcare workers who lost their jobs because they weren't willing to continue with this mass murder, as they say correctly. Now, let me first read a pretty new article, just a brief part of this brand new article published by the Brownstone Institute. It's, I think it came out on October the 14th, a big picture look at the disastrous public health response to COVID-19. An underlying principle of public health is or was to provide the public with accurate information so that they can make good health choices for themselves and their community. The past 3 years have seen this paradigm turned on its head, with the public's money being used to deceive and coerce them, forcing them to follow public health dictates. The public has funded their own incarceration and impoverishment through their taxes, with public funds driving the unprecedented non-pharmaceutical and then pharmaceutical response to a virus that kills mainly old, sick people near the end of their lives. Most healthy people infected with SARS-CoV-2 recover without any intervention, gaining natural immunity, which, in absence of the vaccination, generates a more robust and long-lasting protection with less risk for reinfections as compared to individuals protected by vaccination alone. Globally, the infection fatality rate of SARS-CoV-2 is about 0.15% and comparable to seasonal flu. The IFR, infection fatality rate of those under 20 years, was only 0.0013% and highest for those beyond 70 years. The IRF of COVID-19 among community-dwelling elderly is lower than previously reported in elderly overall. As of July 2022, WHO reported over 601 million confirmed cases and over 6.4 million deaths associated with COVID-19 globally. More than half, 3.5 million, died after the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, though 67.7% of the world population has received at least one vaccination. Well, we all know now that there was never any excess mortality before the start of the vaccinations. None. Even the spikes we saw in New York or in Bergamo were a result of not COVID-19, but rather intentional malpractice. We're not going to go into the details of that. But in the meantime, Steve Kirsch, for example, came up with a figure which is based on the VAERS reports of 1.6 million people who died after vaccination. Now, that doesn't mean that there's causation, but there's correlation. And this very, very high figure definitely warrants a very close look into what's been going on. Our German pathologist, Professor Emeritus Arne Burkhardt, who did postmortems on, I believe, 90 people who died after getting the shots, found the fingerprints. This is my layman speaking here. Fingerprints of the vaccine in 90% of them, which means in 90% of them, he found absolute 100% causation. The one thing that people are talking about, that now that they're seeing that their neighbors, their relatives, people who are close to them are dying after getting the shots or are being seriously injured after getting the shot, the one thing that is not mentioned, or thus far has not been mentioned, is Some people perceive personality changes. My wife and I, for example, have a favorite restaurant, and for quite a while now, we've been wondering if the people who used to serve us in such an elegant and cordial and nice way seem to have become different people. Some of them don't seem to be able to remember anything. They come back to the table once or twice or even 3 times. And some of them have changed completely into docile human beings. But we thought, well, we're just imagining things. But now it turns out that maybe we're not imagining things. Naomi Wolf, who was with us, and Dr. Peter Breggin, Dr. Naomi Wolf, who are both with us, will give us a chance to get a closer look. Naomi experienced something like this, something like what my wife and I thought we were just imagining. And through the research of Professor Sucharit Bhakdi, who found the physical evidence for such personality changes, we can now look at the psychological consequences as explained by Dr. Peter Breggin. Okay, before we go into a more detailed discussion of the vaccines, so-called vaccines inducing brain damage, let me introduce a video, a short 20-minute, 22-minute video done by Professor Sucharit Bhakdi, with a presentation on what we're going to discuss, on how the mRNA vaccines break through the blood-brain barrier and induce brain damage, personality changes. Let's watch that short 22-minute video. It's a presentation he gave in Vienna. There's a longer version of this. You'll find it on the internet. Another longer version with a presentation he gave in Athens. But this is the short one. Most people will be able to understand it.
Now, if I am here today, it's for a very special reason. 4 weeks ago, I don't know whether you saw the video released by the WHO, where they proclaimed that it was their intent to introduce mRNA vaccines for all vaccinations on Earth, and then go from there to treatment of all other diseases, including cancer, etc. And you may know that the first mRNA flu combined vaccine with corona has already been authorized. And there are major attempts to introduce this new mRNA vaccine against the flu this autumn worldwide. Switzerland has joined in, Germany is joining in, Austria is joining in. Now, at that point, my wife Karina and I said, we have to travel. And we have to try to get a message through that will be heard. And I'm going to get this message through now. And I need 15 minutes, that is all. What people do not understand is that all mRNA vaccines are dangerous and are going to threaten life. It does not matter whether the vaccine encodes for the spike protein, for the measles protein, for rubella, for the flu. It does not matter at all. Why? Because the whole danger of the vaccine stems from the ability of the immune system to recognize non-self. So, may we start with, I'm going to tell you about the danger of mRNA vaccines. And this I have done with my wife, Karina Reiss, who's also here, but taking care of the little one outside. Now, this is a cell, this house. And if a cell makes a protein, then fragments of that protein, it's like sawdust when you're sawing on wood, become exposed on the outside of the cell. You have the circle, the triangle, and the rectangle. These are small fragments that appear on the cell, always. There's no way to prevent this. It's necessary. Now, these fragments are recognized by your T lymphocytes. And your T lymphocytes, this one? Okay. Oh dear. The T lymphocytes all look the same in your body. It's like marbles or grains of sand, but they are not the same. They have the distinct capacity to identify the different fragments. So you've got cells that can identify the circle, the triangle, the rectangle. And if this happens, then those T lymphocytes are going to attack the cell and kill it. These are the killer lymphocytes. Now, what is the meaning of all of this? 5 decades ago, the big question was, how can these receptors of the T cells recognize those different fragments? Do the fragments instruct the hands? It's like lock and key. The fragments are the keys, and the receptors of the T cells are the locks. Do the keys instruct the locks to take them up? Or do the locks just evolve during development of the fetus in the mother's womb by chance? Because if the latter were the case, then we would have T cells that recognize self, black, and T cells that will recognize non-self, the reds. And this non-self is defined simply by the fact that it is not in the body of the baby. All right? And it turned out that that is what is the case. So during the fetal development and at the end of fetal development, a mechanism is put in place so that those T cells, those killers that recognize self, are silenced and kept silenced throughout life. That's why you're all sitting here. Otherwise, you would be suffering from autoimmune disease, and your T cells would be killing your organ cells. This does happen once in a while, but seldomly, rarely. But on the other hand, and this is the wonderful side of it, every baby that is born has killer T lymphocytes that are ready to react against non-self when this non-self protein is produced in the body. It does not matter whether it is corona or flu or measles or you name it, you have it. And so a baby is born with a team directed against corona. This might be corona. And when the baby gets infected with the first infections, corona, up jumps the team and goes into a bout of training. And during this training, the T lymphocytes, the locks, get better and better. They fit better and better and better. And so the child in his next year can overcome the infection better because these T lymphocytes kill the baby's cells that are infected, and those are the lung cells, and that doesn't matter because lung cells regenerate. This is the big secret about immunity. Most of the organs in our body can regenerate, and wounds are healed. And then you have T cells that are stronger and stronger and stronger. That's why you're all sitting here, and you never get seriously ill, because you all have a background immunity that is rock solid against all these respiratory viruses that come in, all of them. And it is known that we all have these T cells. It's been published. It's all known. It's just that no one reads the literature. What I'm telling you is none of my discoveries. I'm telling you what other people have discovered. So, what happens when the T cell gets activated because the coronavirus has come in? Or because the mRNA of the coronavirus has been injected into your body? Well, the T cells get activated, and when they get activated, they also activate their brothers, the B cells, and the B cells start making antibodies. And these antibodies will then be found in the bloodstream of vaccinated people. Now, what people don't realize is that these antibodies, if this is, blood, the antibodies are in blood. The coronavirus doesn't come into this room, into the blood. It gets into the hall through the front door of the hotel. And the antibodies are not there. There are no protective antibodies. And anyone who tells you this is lying. The body's antibodies that people find, the WHO, the CDC, the FDA, you name them, you have them, all these crooks. They take the blood of the patients and say they are protected. Of course they're not protected. And this has been known for decades. So don't let people lie to you, guys. That's why, of course, you have all these infections coming in the vaccinated people. They can't stop the virus getting into the front door. But if the antibodies see the antigen, because that is in the blood, on the walls of the blood vessels, they will bind. And if they bind, they will mount attack via the complement system, which is the second killer system of the immune system. We have two killer systems. One are the T lymphocytes, the killer lymphocytes. The second, unknown, but even more powerful than the killer lymphocytes, is the complement system, which is the sister system to clotting. So if you activate clotting, the blood clots. If you activate complement, complement kills. Okay. Now, what is a horror scenario is that this is supposed to be a blood vessel. And you see the vessel wall in one, the inner lining of the vessel wall contacts blood. So anything that is in blood contacts the wall, right? And we know that these mRNA vaccines, all of them, are going to enter the blood in masses, in numbers that are unconceivable. You cannot imagine how many of these are going around in the body of all those poor vaccinated people, children, women. And the cells that they meet most and all the time are the cells of the vessel lining. So it is inevitable that each and every mRNA vaccine packaged in these lipid nanoparticles are going to enter the vessel walls, which is the tapestry, if there were a tapestry here, on the wall of this room. And then, this is number two, you see the mRNA vaccine entering the vessel from the bloodstream. This is something that the virus can never do, you see. Number three, the mRNA is in the cell. Number four, mRNA causes production of that protein for which is encoded. 4 and 5 is the attack by antibodies and by the killer lymphocytes on the vessel wall. And this is the end of the intactness of that vessel wall, wherever it is. What happens then is that you will have a trigger for clotting always, because whenever you scratch the vessel wall, you are going to be planting the seeds for clotting. And second, and this is why what is shown in 7, you're going to have leakage of those very vaccines into the organs. Now you have to realize, guys, that your vessel system is the most intricate system of tunnels in existence. And that system is completely, it's not possible. Large molecules and viruses can't get past that barrier. Your walls are sealed, actually. But if you go around making holes in the walls, then they get out. And then they get to the heart muscle cell and the brain cells and the liver cells and whatever cells that happen to be attacked. But because these packages are in the whole circulation, they reach all the organs of your body, everywhere. Now, this is a microcast of the microvasculature of the human brain, adult. Your brain consumes 20% of the oxygen of the body. And capillaries are so wonderfully, intricately integrated within the brain material. If each capillary is feeding, I don't know how many cells, but those cells are dependent on the circulation. If a clot forms in these capillaries, if something happens to the capillaries, those cells that are being fed are going to die. Now, you know how wonderful our brain is. Nature, God, someone gave it to the human being. And each area of your brain is responsible for something else. One is responsible for recognition, for memory, for movement, for your psyche, for empathy, for your personality. No one really knows where what is, okay? But I can tell you, dementia, Alzheimer, is associated with, very often associated with microclots and micronecrosis in the frontal brain. It's very typical. But of course, there's also an area that if you knock it out, you get jerks, Huntington disease, you know. So you cannot afford to clog any single capillary in the brain. If you do this, there is going to be consequences that are irreversible because the brain, the heart is similar, by the way. The heart consumes 10% of oxygen, and the athletes, you know, I saw tennis yesterday, then the heart consumes over 80% of the oxygen. And each of these capillaries in the heart is responsible for feeding myocardial tissue. And if that dies, it is the second organ that cannot repair the lesions. It's dead for life. Imagine. Now, we said over 2 years ago, it has to be feared that these spike proteins, of course, will be appearing then on the vessel wall, and that will seed the roots for thrombosis and for leakage. Can this be shown? Well, let me tell you that there's a paper now in preparation by a very, very wonderful pathologist whose name is not mentioned here on purpose. He does not want his name mentioned. The paper is not yet published officially. What he found was something so startling and so unique that I said, I'm going to use this chance to show it to you. So what he found was, there was a man deceased after the 3rd vaccination, and no one knew what he had died from. And the pathology looked at his brain. And what he found was listen very carefully, multifocal means at many points in the brain, many. Necrotizing means dying and dead. Encephalitis. This is something that has been reported about 10 times in the world literature following infection by the flu, influenza. But never otherwise. This case is the first case where clearly it is not the flu, and it is also not corona. It is the spike protein, okay? Because he found on the endothelial cells of the capillaries. Now, Marguerite is also sitting here, Marguerite. She will say it's true. You know, capillary thrombosis is something that is not known in the brain. It doesn't happen. But here, it's the capillaries. And when they are closed, the cells die. There's no way to get out of this. No way. And what he found was that there is no nucleocapsid. This is the other virus protein that must be there if the virus were there. So it's not the virus, it's just the spike. And therefore it is caused by the vaccine, okay? There is no way to get around this. And in the brain itself, he sees neuronal death, 1, microglial proliferation, and invading T lymphocytes, number 3. So it's all documented. It is all documented. He has also looked at 2 hearts of patients, one who had died of acute heart attack, the other had died of aortic aneurysm, but he found the same things in the heart. And there again, he found spike proteins in the small vessels, in the smallest vessels of the myocardium, which you see here. He saw something that has never been described in pathology textbooks. Areas, yellow, of scars, These are cells that had died some time ago because this vaccination had been repeated, the booster. So the yellow are the cells that had died, and these are the scars that had formed already at death. But beside the scars, in the red part, that is the muscle, in the muscle itself, he found lesions, acute lesions, growing lesions, with lymphocytes that were obviously killing the myocytes. Z-band damage, meaning that these cells are going to die, and dead cells, that's number 4. Fresh, just before death. Now, I don't care whether anyone is for the vaccination or against the vaccination. I care so much that everyone knows that these data are now there. And they speak such a clear language that it is not our job to fight anyone. I never fight anyone. I'm trying to bring the two halves of our society together again. Because, and I'm talking to the mainstream media, I'm talking even to the politicians, because the politicians have no idea of what they're doing. So let's not fight against them. Let's talk to them so that we all come to our senses and say, this cannot be allowed to happen. Even if the WHO said so, don't. And remember, and this is the last thing I want to say, the WHO is a private club, like a private football club. A club that is being financed, has been financed at the top by what? Bill Gates. Bill Gates is now number 2. Who is the top financier? Germany. The German taxpayers are financing the WHO and enforcing mRNA vaccination because, of course, it is the German companies that are earning most and donating. Now, people, I'm completely unpolitician, but I tell you, there are so many people who are still humans who don't want this to happen, not only to themselves, but to their friends, to their family, to their children. You can't do this. You can't let your children be vaccinated because they are changing mankind. All your personality is going to be changed. Your brain is being changed, and your heart is being weakened. Every injected mRNA vaccine is going to cause severe damage in our body and must be forbidden. Thank you.
So that's the video. And now let's talk to Peter and Naomi about what is happening in reality. That's the scientific part. That's Sucharit Bhakdi's scientific part. But now let's see what they think of this. All right, let's first talk to Dr. Naomi Wolf. We've had her as a guest on the Corona Investigative Committee quite a few times, and we have introduced her quite a few times. But still, Naomi, can you briefly introduce yourself? I know you're a journalist, you're a writer, you're a women's lib advocate, but you're probably many more things, right?
Thank you so much. Sure, happy to. It's an honor to be here again, Dr. Fuellmich, and to be with Dr. Breggin. I'm CEO now of dailycloud.io, which is a news site that specializes in democracy. And I'm also author of a book about the last 2.5 years, which makes the case that there is a war against humanity, which is increasingly commonly accepted, unfortunately. And it's called The Bodies of Others, The New Authoritarians, COVID-19, and the War Against the Human. And I'm not a medical doctor. Of course, my DPhil is in poetry, but I did write a piece, which is probably why I'm here, on my Substack, in which I looked at the aspect of the mRNA injections that personally give me nightmares and which were the reason I personally didn't get injected long ago, and that is the lipid nanoparticles. And I can speak more about it, but I did see a potential mechanism that connected the lipid nanoparticles, which cross the blood-brain barrier, to the personality changes that you described and that I do see and that I could elaborate on more if you like.
Yes, please do that, because the article I read, I think it's a couple of weeks old or so, and it described how I think you were at a party and you noticed something is off, something isn't quite right. You couldn't really put your finger on it. Then afterwards, or maybe when you were still there, you kind of realized that it was, these are my words, that this was a lifeless situation. They were just going through the motions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would take it a little further. I mean, you summarized it exactly correctly. I will just preamble this by saying I grew up in San Francisco. So I do believe in and was curious about aspects of human existence that may call on other disciplines than the kind of post-Enlightenment Western notion of how bodies work. But I'll get to that in a minute. I was in New York and on a rooftop bar, and just I had this sense that I was in a hologram, that I was seeing the crowd but not feeling the crowd. And I checked that experience walking along the streets. And I've lived in New York for decades, and Manhattan is famous for the sense of a kind of a pulsating electricity of all these millions of people closely crowded together. And I couldn't feel that. There was a sense of like a danse macabre, and certainly when body workers have spoken about this, when I hug people I love who've been vaccinated, especially if they were recently vaccinated, there's like a missing heart connection. I mean, these are very subjective terms, change in the energy field. You can barely feel them in the way that you used to, but more. So then I began to think about, electricity, because we are electromagnetic beings. That's why things like EKGs and MRIs work. And this gets edited, so I'll say at least EKGs. And electricity fuels the neural synapses, and electricity, causes the heart to beat. I mean, so many neural impulses are electricity. So I was thinking about lipid nanoparticles because they're, I've been, in a way, it's a blessing not to be a scientist and not to be a medical doctor, because you can kind of ask questions that may seem outside the purview of how people are trained to think if they have a formal scientific education. But I as an investigative journalist, I looked at the websites of the manufacturers of the lipid nanoparticles. And as I say, that's why I did not get the vaccine long ago, because Moderna's website boasted that this material enters or affects every cell in the body. And the first thing I thought of was the brain. And the other thing I thought of was the heart. And then I also, as a woman and a writer about women's health issues, I thought about the uterus and ovaries, and these delicate mechanisms that allow people to be fertile, women to be fertile, and hormones, So the lipid nanoparticles are designed, and first of all, they're industrial fats covered in polyethylene glycol, which is a petroleum byproduct and a toxin, and they're designed to cross every membrane in the human body. And if you're not scared by that, that one sentence, everyone should be, because that means they're designed, people have known this for a decade, to cross the blood-brain barrier. They're designed to, enter that space. And, again, as a women's health advocate and writer, the other important membranes, the placenta is a very important boundary or barrier in the body, and the lipid nanoparticles cross the placenta, of course, enter the fetal environment. So we also have a very gifted scholar, analyst, physician, Dr. Robert Chandler, on our team of 3,500 medical and scientific experts who are going through the Pfizer documents, the War Room Daily Cloud Research Volunteers team. And they've issued 40 reports. You can see them on dailycloud.io. And that's the source of my warnings to the world about reproductive harms and other horrific harms. But specifically, they reveal this kind of, and by the way, I'm Jewish. So, and my grandmother, lost 9 siblings in the Holocaust. So I kind of feel like no one will berate me or sue me for saying these are very Mengele type experiments in the Pfizer documents. They are like minutely focused on human reproduction or mammalian reproduction. They're minutely focused on damage to to, high miscarriage rates, high abortion rates. And so then back to the personality changes, looking at how the lipid nanoparticles enter everywhere and thinking about nerves. I asked our researchers to look at the effect of the lipid nanoparticles on neural responses, neurological responses. And I got a very detailed report from another distinguished professor of pathology, Dr. Chris Flowers. And he said, indeed, these lipid nanoparticles degrade the myelin sheath, as they would, because they go through everything. They basically weaken everything. And the myelin sheath is how neural impulses are transmitted. And when you have a degradation of the myelin sheath, you have the kinds of neurological conditions you see at scale in the Pfizer documents that I was very surprised to see there at first, like MS and Parkinson's and dementia and all the things that happen when human neurological systems are degraded. So now, closing out back to the kind of change in personality, this really made a lot of mysteries make sense. I talked about the missing energy field, which you don't have to believe in. It's not something that Western science has confirmed, though many body workers are talking about how they can't feel their patients anymore if they're vaccinated. They can't feel the energy field of their patients. The notion of a human energy field that affects health is absolutely standard, of course, in Ayurvedic medicine and Tibetan medicine and Chinese medicine. But leaving that aside, what these lipid nanoparticles entering the brain and degrading the the nervous system really do go to is something that you can measure, but that I was seeing around me, which was colleagues of mine after they got injected would be much more dualistic in their thinking, much more rigid. And if you know the structure of the brain, that could make sense. It could be that, the prefrontal cortex is affected, or it could be that there's a kind of almost a rigidifying or a slowing. And I'm not a physician, so I'm kind of groping here, but if people's thinking is more rigid and there's damage to the neural structures, that seems like something worth asking more questions about. But I also knew that people were much angrier, and many people online have been confirming this and describing their own experiences of it. Less ability to modulate emotions, kind of more primal reaction to provocation. And people have also been saying, and I've witnessed this, that the changes are affective, that people that have always been affectionate, warm, loving have become cold, distant. Many people talk about adult children or bigger children, cutting things off, like saying things like, well, we're not aligned politically, so I'm not going to visit you anymore, and just what we've seen from the vaccinated to the unvaccinated, the kind of bizarre willingness, which I could only interpret in the light of mass hypnosis, which other people like Dr. Desmet, Matthias Desmet have talked about, or political inflammation, as you see in a kind of group psychosis, as in, forgive me, but Germany in the 30s, but, in other places where there have been kind of in-groups and out-groups, Jim Crow laws, but this could kind of also help explain the kind of willingness of vaccinated to cut off the unvaccinated, to, deny them groceries, deny them medical care. People are seeing at an atomized level or an individual level, this kind of closing down of compassion. And I don't have the answers. And I thought that Dr. Bhakdi's discussion, was very profound and important. And I'm very interested to hear what Dr. Breggin is going to say. And I know there are many, I'm focused on the lipid nanoparticles in the brain and the heart, but, other people are more focused on the spike protein, which they're finding, as you say. But I think these are questions that absolutely have to be asked, because, and this is the last thing I'll say, my argument throughout is that this has been a war on the human and what makes us human. And if an injection can close down people's compassion or their higher powers of nuanced critical thinking, it could close down, close down their connection to a sense of, spirituality. It could close down their sense of responsibility to the next generation. We don't know. Like, this is a massive experiment on the human brain and the human heart. And I guess I'll end with that.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. Professor Bhakdi found this to be extremely scary. At the end of his presentation, the short version of which we've all seen, the one that he gave in Vienna, but there's a longer version that he gave in Athens. At the end of his presentation, he directly points to the fact that some of the small capillaries, and I guess it starts in the frontal lobe of the brain, some of the small capillaries don't get enough oxygen anymore. And he says that is what seems to be causing these perceived personality changes. Now,
well, that would explain the lack of impulse control and the more primitive thinking, because it's the prefrontal cortex that is where higher thought takes place.
What do you think? I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
It is definitely scary, because you know that some people have been talking about what's the word? I think it's even on the WHO's website about people who are not people anymore. Very, like from a horror movie. But now it seems that there is a scientific foundation for this vision, which is a horrific vision. I was going to ask Peter, because I got a short abstract, I think it was. Your wife Ginger sent it to me, and it includes a piece on lobotomy. And you wrote it many, many years ago. And you are one of the most famous, if not the most famous, psychiatrists in the United States. You stopped experiments on the homeless, on people, on the destitute, people who can't defend themselves. You more or less stopped lobotomy. What do you think, as a psychiatrist? Does what Naomi has seen and what she just explained, and what Professor Bhakdi looks into and comes up with a scientific conclusion, medical conclusion, does it make sense to you, or is this totally out of the question?
Oh, it makes a great deal of sense. I'd like to actually look at a bit of the overview before getting into the clinical details. Naomi's done a very good job of describing some of the clinical phenomena. But if you look at what are the globalists are trying to do with their plans, with their various efforts, and it's definitely a matter of their being aware, because there's a whole long history of animal experimentation showing that, in fact, the lipid nanoparticle packaging of the mRNA was very harmful to animals, and in particular killed them. And in 2020, just as the infamous rush through the FDA around the world, the equivalents of the FDA were taking place, 2020, a Fauci-funded study out of American universities declared that the mRNA platform, which is basically the lipid nanoparticles, was too dangerous to experiment on in humans. So, right, and all this is in our book, Ginger Breggin and Peter and Ginger Breggin, which is COVID-19 and the global predators. COVID-19 and the global predators. We are the prey, and you can get it on the usual places around the world, starting with Amazon, and it's both an ebook and a read book, and the paperback, giant paperback with over 1,000 citations. documents that they knew what they were doing. And this was very hard for me because, I've been in court a lot. I've testified over 100 times in court. And as you know, when you do that, you get straight and narrow. You stick to facts. You never give them any little inroad into saying you're a conspiracy theorist. And so if anything, as Naomi was suggesting, as a physician and a scientist, I've gotten narrowed. So I was not expecting to find what I'm about to say, which is that clearly what the damage being done, probably the most important damage being done, the two things are the deaths and the infertility. Now, that is a program. Nearly all the globalists, whether it's Bill Gates or whether it's even Fauci has talked this way in so-called scientific articles, or Klaus Schwab, or Xi Jinping from China. Mm-hmm. They all want to control population. It is one of their dominant ideas. Mm-hmm. Bill Gates happily has a whole section on his website of the Gates Foundation about population control. It's not something we have to conjure up from his little smiles that he gives when he thinks about having fewer human beings. Creating infertility is one of the ways in which the World Health Organization, and I think also with Gates involved with them in Africa, has used vaccines to deliver infertility to people. Used the flu vaccine for that, to deliver substances that would cause infertility. So they wanted to cause infertility. It's almost a unanimous view among global predators. We have too many human beings, too many to control, too many useless eaters, too many problem people. And that's a very, very important part. So we have infertility and we have actually culling. But there's another aspect of brain damage now when you get into the brain, and that is conformity and docility. Mm-hmm. So when they finally got around to doing detailed studies of lobotomy, one of the ways that they put it, and these were people who favored lobotomy, they said the person in a controlled, confined situation does reasonably well. That is, they're manageable. They don't get out of control. They can be led about. They will line up and get their dinners. They do not get they'll get irritable, but they don't have the energy to do a criminal act or the energy or planning to really get into serious trouble. Walter Friedman bragged about that. He said, these stories of bank robbers by lobotomized people, why they don't have the ability to plan or the energy or the concern, very proudly about what they're doing to human beings. Now, what is better for totalitarian mass than producing docility, lack of being able to plan anything, that like a rebellion? So to the extent that they anticipated a generalized brain damage reaction, docility is that's such a big part of it. One of the reasons perhaps that I'm not exactly like most scientists and physicians is that I got introduced to this whole area as a college freshman at Harvard. For 4 years, without any training, I had the keys to the hospital and led the program. And one of the things I noticed immediately is I got to see a lot of lobotomized patients. It was 1954 to 58 that I was in college. And I got to see shock treatment and insulin coma treatment because I would just walk in and I was recognizable. People thought I'd been given the keys. I just didn't return them one night and nobody complained. And what I noticed was very, very apparent to me as a college, by now maybe a sophomore when I'm really, really active. And that is that when the person would be led in, say, to the insulin coma, which is simply giving you an injection of insulin sufficient to deprive your brain of enough sugar to kill you, that one of the basic things that I could see was that people came in as human beings. They were angry, most of them, upset. They didn't want to be in this place. They would certainly be irritable. They'd be difficult to handle. And then they'd get knocked out by the insulin. They'd go into seizures. They were literally dying. And then they'd be given sugar, water, or orange juice with extra sugar, and they'd come out of it. And now they were not just docile. They were grateful for having their lives saved. They were completely helpless, docile people. And that was the goal. So I knew from the beginning that all the other things they were saying about biochemical imbalances or improving their mental health was all nonsense. This was a total institution, very similar to an extermination camp. They were just having their way with these people, making them more amenable. And then the same story when the psych drugs came in, the big antipsychotic drugs, which came in the 50s. I got to see some of their effects. One dose produced somebody similar to somebody who'd been abused in a concentration camp. One dose made people docile. And as Naomi mentioned, this occurs through the destruction or at least increasing dysfunctionality in the frontal lobes of the brain. But the brain's also very integrated. The production of these widespread hemorrhages and it sounds like hemorrhages, but certainly thrombosis, first you get a hemorrhage, is very similar to shock treatment. Because in shock treatment, the brain is a resistor, and then the electricity goes through the brain all over the brain because it's going through the resistor. And also the most intense current goes through the electrodes. So you get very serious memory loss because at least one electrode's over the temporal lobe memory centers. But forget the memory centers and just think about the head's a resistor. You build up the electricity, it goes through, and you get widespread small hemorrhages in human and animal studies. And so what happens after somebody has shock treatment, just setting aside that terrible memory crushing, and the person becomes helpless, dependent, needy. The person loses their spark, loses the highest functions because they also get some of that electricity is going right through the frontal lobes. In general, all widespread injury to the brain or specific injury to the frontal lobes produces a hierarchy of losses, again, mimicking exactly what Naomi's talking about. The first loss is love.
Oh.
That is the first thing, the most sensitive, the highest functioning of the brain. So that a lobotomized patient, an electroshock patient, the first thing that is going to be missing is the fine-tuning of love. This will also happen with most psychiatric drugs. It happens with most neurotoxins. I think it happens with marijuana. I know it does. It happens in alcoholism. The finest tuning goes first. That's the most complex, the most subtle. In a sense, our frontal lobes that fill our heads like no other animal. No other animal has these great big foreheads that we do. The frontal lobes contain our civilization. And in a very, very, Naomi, I'm witnessing you crying as I'm talking. That reminds me of a story about, I had to describe all this in a courtroom on a number of occasions. And this particular occasion, there was a man who had been lobotomized. He was the plaintiff and he was sitting in the audience. And I went up, I did something you're not supposed to do, but I was so heartbroken to have him listen to all this that I went up to him during the break and I said, I'm so sorry you have to sit here and listen to this. I said, it's, I'm surprised you're not crying or something like that. And he looked at me very flatly, just said, I am crying.
Oh my God.
And it's, it is an oh my God kind of thing that I've never forgotten. So what's going on here is that the civilization of the person, the highest centers of the brain, are being impaired, along with lots of other things that relate to it in the brain. It's not just those frontal lobes. The brain is integrated beyond our knowledge. I mean, you go deep into the brain to something called a basal ganglia, and damaging that area is going to causes Parkinsonism, but it also causes a dementia, a loss of brightness. Parkinson's people, they don't have their brightness. Their connectivity is impaired. So all of this follows simply from injuring generalized to the brain so that it includes the frontal lobes. The irritability that you mentioned, Naomi, that's the impulse control that you mentioned. And it's one of the highest centers is our ability not to get irritable and angry with each other. That's what you mentioned. It's empathy, that's caring, that's love. It's all a package. What I'm fond of saying that if you, when you describe the frontal lobes, you're saying more about yourself than the frontal lobes because it's everything. So what are you picking out? Mm-hmm. What are you picking out? And the lobotomists were picking out how much more docile and controllable a person was. Mm-hmm. And you and I are, because of our nature, are picking out with sadness the loss of that finest tuning of all. Now, how much these people knew about all of this, neurologists and neurosurgeons, the people may have consulted, would not give you these descriptions that Naomi is giving and that I'm giving. After I got through taking on the lobotomists, the psychosurgeons, I came up with a new phrase, which is, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to be a brain surgeon. You can just be a butcher. And they don't know all of this stuff. So how much of that's done purposely, I don't know. But they are definitely creating the kinds of masses that they want. There's no question about that. That if this is happening as it seems to be, and I'm not sure, I don't have as much experience out in the world right now. Some of you are. I'm inside writing and being 86 years old and trying to make sure my health and my strength stays, and we don't go out a lot and travel a lot right now.
Not to rooftop parties in New York, right?
No, not at all. So let me think if I've sort of covered everything. I want to say that Naomi's writing is incredible. Last night, Ginger was reading to me from your book, Naomi, and it's you're in a different class from some of us as a writer, and it's really good work. And I think I could stop there for the moment now and maybe just go to more discussion between us, if that works. Or ask me anything fine. Specific.
I wanted to interject something, Peter. It just so happens, and I don't think this is a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I used to when I was just a lawyer, but it's different now. It just so happens that both you and Naomi, you're both Jewish. I'm German. And if we take a closer look at the horrific picture which has been unfolding for us over the last 3 years, I can't help but confirm what both of you are saying. Much of this, if not all of this, reminds us of what happened 80 years ago in the Third Reich. This cannot be a coincidence for 3 reasons. You probably know that the biggest donor to the WHO is now not Bill Gates anymore, but it's Germany. You probably know that the PCR test, as ordered by the WHO, was invented, not the original one, but the one that was used in order to create cases that didn't exist, was created by German professor who's a fake professor who was also a fake doctor by the name of Drosten. And you probably know that the first mRNA vaccine, so-called vaccines, come from Germany, BioNTech, which I think has now been more or less bought up by Pfizer. Vera Sharaf reminded me that we must not ignore the parallels between what we're seeing now and what happened then. And one of the common denominators is that something is wrong with Germany, or something is wrong with those parts of the German history that don't seem to have died off. To me, it appears as though this is a continuation. This is not a new start. This is a continuation of what we've been seeing. What do you think, Naomi?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's very brave of you to bring that up, given how, what is the word, criminalized discussion such as that has been in Germany. But 1,000% I agree with you. And in fact, I would say that everyone should read Racial Hygiene, as well as reread The Nazi Doctors. Racial Hygiene is a book, I think it was written in the 80s, very scholarly, thoroughly sourced, looking at the role of medicine and medical organizations and doctors in being kind of the tip of the spear of even in advance of 1933, even in advance of the formal ascendancy of the National Socialist Party as kind of the majority, doctors were enlisted and medical organizations were enlisted to advocate a discourse of, life unworthy of life, as Dr. Breggin mentioned, useless eaters, and to create a narrative in which impaired youth and kids were singled out and basically done away with, long before there were the concentration camps at the end of the 30s that most people are more aware of. But I would also note that what Racial Hygiene points out is that at the end of the war, World War II, the Nazi doctors didn't mostly get convicted. Of course, there were Nuremberg trials, but they went on to, many of them, to very respected roles in post-war Germany. And the author of Racial Hygiene makes the case very persuasively that eugenics, which is what it had been sort of kind of called very openly in Germany in the late 20s into the 30s and into the 40s, of course, became genetics. And that the geneticists of the post-war period and the universities and institutions that study genetics, like the kind of genetic focus of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, descends directly from Nazi Germany, and is kind of a repackaging of eugenics. And I guess the other thing I would say is that every day, and I'm trying to write about this. I appreciate Dr. Breggin's kind words about my writing, but sometimes certain situations are kind of beyond your best efforts as a writer, and I'm really struggling with that. As I know that writers witnessing, what was unfolding in Germany also kind of struggled to express what they were seeing. Canada has a euthanasia program now, an assisted suicide program, and I was watching a clip of a medical official basically advocating for babies to the age of 1 to be marched to assisted suicide, or, well, it's not assisted suicide, it's murder at that point, or, eugenics or euthanasia, I suppose, with not even a parent, with a guardian or a tutor, right? And also saying, well, minors under 18 have the right to assisted suicide. I mean, just this like death cult. And at scale, and the deaths that we're seeing at scale, and looking at Pfizer documents and seeing how Pfizer knew, that these injections would murder and sterilize people, and they just kept going. The FDA knew and just kept going. As a Jew and as a human being, there's no way to process what we're seeing in terms of like a collective societal abdication of what we thought was our eternal Western post-World War II certainty that human life has value and you don't engage in mass murder anymore. That's gone. There's global mass murder. And And each time I think I've come to the end of the horrors that I'm seeing, I'm actually now seeing a horror on a scale, that outdoes the Holocaust. I mean, I just have to say that numerically, we're going to see millions and millions dying if we haven't already seen millions dying. And I checked Steve Kirsch's numbers, and there are certainly hundreds of thousands in America based on independent sources I looked at, whose deaths could be attributed already to the mRNA injection. But, by the time this is over, there are going to be greater numbers than the ones, my own people who died due to intentional annihilation. So I guess all of this is a roundabout way to say anyone who avoids language about the Holocaust is engaging in intellectual negligence, to say the least.
It's exactly what Vera Sharaf is saying, and I believe that to be absolutely true. We must not ignore this, because if we do ignore it, that's making fun of the Holocaust.
Exactly.
or mitigating it. I mean, it is so obvious. It's just the weird thing is that for some strange reason, but maybe it does have to do with personality changes induced by the so-called vaccines, it's only us, the resistance, that can see what's going on. The others can't see it. Even if there are people dropping dead right and left, they can't see it. They don't make the connection. It's very bizarre. The word that I could think of is zombie mania. This is something that the WHO has on their website. Zombie mania.
I'm going to have to take a look at that. That is super scary.
Yeah.
I mean, so much is falling into place just as I hear Dr. Breggin speak, really. I've been so baffled at how many educated people I know, like highly, journalists, editors, psychologists, who will say the words, don't show me that material. And I keep thinking, where did your critical faculties go? Where did your, Ivy League training go, where we engage with evidence? But if indeed people are losing their ability to engage in nuanced analysis, they may literally be, I want to ask Dr. Breggin, when someone's, prefrontal cortex is impaired or their higher faculties are impaired, do they have trouble with, evidence that contradicts a belief system, for example? Or do they have trouble processing evidence that challenges what happens in their minds when they're confronted with evidence that challenges their belief system, I guess I should say?
Well, they get very anxious, and then they'll confabulate. They'll make up reasons why they won't think about it or can't think about it. So it's entirely possible that they're operating as brain-damaged people from what we're talking about today.
Wow.
I wanted to, there's a couple of different things I wanted to refer to in regard to this. Reiner, I don't know if I ever told you, I came to Germany. I was invited to come to Germany in 1983. I actually got to go and see East Germany because the wall wasn't down yet, to present at the first conference ever in the Third Reich, and I believe it's the only one, on medicine in the Third Reich. And my specialty was something you've touched on, which is the psychiatric Holocaust. And on my website, on Breggin.com, in the science papers, I have, I think, the deepest in the English language analysis of the role of psychiatry in actually bringing about the Holocaust. It's a much more
We'll have to read that.
Honest analysis than Nazi doctors. And one of the major, which was Lifton's book, one of the major differences between what I found, and this is before his book, was that the Nazi doctors, it was all the doctors. It was all the psychiatrists, basically,
Of course.
because the euthanasia murder program was organized out of Berlin, professors checking off euthanasia forms, and then patients, if they weren't being killed in the state hospitals, being shipped off to murder centers, Hadamar, Sonnenstein, places people haven't heard of. And so the way this plays into some of what we're talking about is that it was, in a sense, very ordinary professionals, to the extent that psychiatrists are ordinary, who willingly, eagerly, based on actual years of writing and thinking about it, murdered all their own patients. And so if you can get doctors to murder their own patients for ideological reasons without even the Fuhrer being involved, eventually the Fuhrer actually canceled the program because it's the only thing that he ever got booed about. And I think it was in Kaufbeuren, where he stopped at a train stop and the local villagers booed him because they were killing their patients up in the hospital, poisoning them, starving them, and then cremating them in the hospital. I was actually given photographs of that when a man who had liberated that hospital heard me talk on a radio back in the 70s. So much information here. I apologize for that. But ordinary people will do terrible things. And so that shouldn't surprise us too much. I think it was the Norwegians who bragged that, how different they were from the Nazis. And then eventually the Nazis set up a camp in Norway, and right away everybody wanted to work for the camp. This is a part of human nature. I don't think we should be thinking in terms of like a mass formation or a psychosis. I want to address that for a minute. Everything we're seeing in America and Germany and other places is accounted for by living in a totalitarian regime. We are being humiliated. We're being threatened. Our leaders are being threatened all the time. The leading physicians are terrified and won't say anything at all. So, but what now I'm thinking about is now combine that with having some sort of a minimal or even major brain damage from the spike protein, from both COVID and from the injections, because the COVID is probably doing the same thing to people as the injections would be doing, that we're looking at a society in which a mild form of brain damage, which could get worse with time, by the way. Brain damage matures in a way. It has a tendency to get worse, not better. Mm-hmm. The brain's regenerative ability is very minimalistic. And you can get if, say, one batch of cells died, then over time the surrounding cells die. You get these phenomena of spread from injury, and it's possible that most folks who are talking about this now don't realize that the injury spreads. I got my expertise in brain damage from being in so many trials of electroshock brain damage, lobotomy brain damage, and all these other things. Thinking about my own legacy, I was the first doctor to testify in an anti-lobotomy trial and to win. The first doctor to testify in an electroshock trial and to have a win. So I've got a lot of basis on that, to talk about all this. But a lot of what we're seeing is also totalitarianism. And how do you tell apart this mild brain damage or even a serious brain damage at times from the effects of totalitarian abuse? It's not necessarily easy, because under abuse situations, one of the first things to go again is love, tenderness, caring. So people who've been captured here in America, even, and you bring them, you abuse them, and then they escape. And when they get home, they don't just open their arms and hug and kiss. There's the threats, the emotional trauma reproduces something that can be hard to distinguish from physical damage to the frontal lobes. It can be because you get a sense of mechanical breakdown if you get to talk with the person. Even better than testing is just interviewing a person. You'll begin to see glitches that just feel like the machinery is broken. The person's trying to remember something and can't quite get it. The person's trying to put two and two together and can't quite get it. Things like that perhaps explains some of what Naomi's been saying is different from where you lose your higher meaning, your higher abilities, but you still might be able to put two and two together. I hope that makes some sense.
It does.
But it's complex.
The thing is, I can't believe that this is a coincidence or that this is happening without them wanting it to happen. I think this is part of the agenda. The one thing that I can't understand is why it is that so many doctors seem to not even care about human life or helping people. And very recently, I used to be on 2 ethics committees at the University of Göttingen and at the University of Hanover. Very recently, I met I'm not going to mention his name now, but a very high-ranking former manager of one of the 2 universities. And I told him, I always got the idea that surgeons and the other doctors who were also on these ethics committees were acting like divas, kind of stuck up. And he said, no, that's not it. That's not it. They just don't care. They are only interested in making a lot of money, in buying big homes and big cars, and getting as many women, he explicitly said so, laid as possible. They don't care about human lives. Now, this is probably an overgeneralization, but this is what he said. He said, if you pay them $100,000 to conduct a drug trial, with them full well knowing that out of the 1,000 subjects, half of them are going to die, they're going to do it because they want the money. Again, I'm not saying that all of them are like this, but this very high-ranking manager of one of the 2 hospitals said so. They don't care. They're only in it for the money. Maybe that explains why what's happening right now, how there's hardly anyone of the doctors of the mainstream media, the doctors in particular, who dare speak out. And those who do, of course, are threatened, like Professor Bhakdi, are being put on trial, criminal trial. Is this a defect that is a built-in defect, or is it, Peter, a result of the medical education, of the medical education system that we're dealing with? Or am I totally off? Is this manager totally off?
No, I don't think he's totally off. But I think that equally important to money are 2 other factors. One is power. Mm-hmm. And many people who go into medicine, and I think we're seeing it more and more than in my day now, are pretty remote and out of touch, but authoritarian figures. And mm-hmm. Now they're going into what kind of medicine? They're going into a bureaucratic medicine. Mm-hmm. They're experiencing that in their training, and they're experiencing it as patients too. So you have the authoritarianism. You have this new kind of person who is not a good connector, who's seeing a way to have power, but you don't have to be a good connector. Mm-hmm. So authority and power. But then there's another thing, which is identity.
Before you go into that, let me briefly interrupt, because I know that Naomi needs to leave, and I want to give her a quick chance to.
Great.
Maybe, are you about to leave, Naomi? She's gone. Oh, she's gone already. All right. I'm sorry. I should have said goodbye to her, but I'm very grateful for. Yeah, me neither. But she told me beforehand that she only had about an hour. But yeah. Please continue. I'm sorry, Peter.
Identity is incredibly important. If you think about what kind of courage it takes to do different things that threaten your identity are far more terrifying than things that just threaten your life. Mm-hmm. If you look at, say, the courage that policemen and firemen routinely show in rescuing people or saving lives or facing death every time they knock on a door. Yeah. Or stop a car. They don't know what they're going to come up against. Mm-hmm. But that same policeman will get on a witness stand, as I've seen in court time and again, and tell a more or less fake story because he's been asked to by the Attorney General, by the powers that be. And if that same policeman or a fireman finds out that that there's corruption in his local precinct, the odds are overwhelming he will ignore it. because our identity in a group that we build over a lifetime in different ways, but the camaraderie of the police or the military and so on, because same thing is true in the military. Soldiers will risk their lives all the time, but how often do they become whistleblowers? Very, very rarely.
Yeah.
The greatest courage seems to be to risk identity within your own group. People will rather die than do that, and they'll willingly die for a good cause that they have support for, and if they survive, they're going to get a medal for. But for them to say no to their whole profession, to give up that power, that authority, and the identity. So it's wealth, there's authority and power, there's identity. And I think that identity is the strongest of all of them. And among doctors, you think of all that goes into building that sense of identity, but also superiority over other people. If you think about that, it's a big deal, and it is trained into us. And a lot of people are selected to go in. They self-select to go into medicine for that reason. I mean, I think I'm the only person I ever knew. Maybe you've known somebody who went into medicine to be a reformer. Because I went into.
I know no one.
I knew the Harvard psychiatrists at Harvard. They loved our program. In those days, you could have a social psychiatry, not anymore. But in those days, psychiatries actually had more opportunities for alternative kinds of approaches. Nothing that would overturn the thing. I mean, once I came out against lobotomy, I got extruded. But
how can that be? How can that be? Because at that time, most people should have understood about the horrors of lobotomy. Your wife sent me some of the pictures. One of them was this, I guess now infamous doctor. I forget his name. You mentioned him.
Walter Freeman.
Yes, exactly.
Probably.
He didn't seem to care at all. If you look at his face, and if you look at the way he wasn't even wearing a mask or anything. He was just performing something that he didn't even really seem to be interested in.
Well, he was ghoulish, and he had a giggle about him. He was positively ghoulish. And I mean, I talked to a mother who brought her 10-year-old into Dr. Freeman's office for a neurological consult, or a psychiatric, because he was not a neurologist or a surgeon. He was a psychiatrist, into his office for a psychiatric consultation. And he offered to lobotomize her in the office that day.
Wow.
He didn't use sterile methods. He had a shock machine. He'd give electroshock to knock you out. And he would slip ice picks around the eyes of the person and tap them, and they would break through the thin, I'm sorry, folks, if you're just not prepared with this, through the thin layer of bone and swish them around. And he did this to probably 5,000 people.
Oh, my God.
And he did it. He would travel from state hospital to state hospital. Now, I do believe I'm the only psychiatrist, only physician who ever said no to this, who said publicly no. And I'm going to stop you.
Well, was this accepted medical therapy? Or was it conducted in secrecy?
It was conducted in amphitheaters. Freeman went around. He had a trailer of some kind, and he drove around the country, and he'd do it in amphitheaters. And there's stories of him, being acting like a matador and doing both eyes at once, and this bizarre stuff. And no one ever stood up to him and to me.
Wow.
I was the first psychiatrist to ever take a lawsuit against him, but he died before the suit was over. So why would I be the first? I think it's identity issues more than anything.
But the thing is,
they tried to get rid of me,
Yeah, but they didn't succeed. And if they don't succeed, that's what my grandfather always used to say. It's going to make you even stronger. Now you're a world famous psychiatrist, and that's one of the things you're famous for, stopping lobotomy.
There's still a little bit going on in Europe, but we stopped pretty much all the ongoing ones. And now there's one or two more sneaking around at the highest point. See, the highest in medicine, and especially psychiatry is the worst, because they're the most arrogant. They're the most know-it-all. They're the most willing to grab whatever new powerful thing that will enhance their identity.
You know, in hindsight, and hindsight starts, I think, in the late or early 1980s for me, because that's when I watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson playing the role of someone who was lobotomized. And I thought that was a very credible and very ghoulish thing to see, even though we knew, of course, this is only a movie, but I also knew that this is part of reality. Back then, I thought, oh, maybe they're not doing it quite this way, and maybe they're not doing quite that kind of damage. But now that I'm listening to you, it was even worse than that. It was even worse than what we saw in that movie.
Yes, particularly Walter Freeman, and he worked in the beginning with a neurosurgeon, Watts. They were both at George Washington University, and Watts said that the psychiatrist should not be doing surgery, and he would not work with him anymore. Now, Freeman, just to give you an idea, I mean, he was elected president of the D.C. Psychiatric Association. I mean, he was given medals, he was lauded. And Monitz, who invented the treatment, it's not really a treatment, he invented this brutality in Portuguese state mental hospitals, got the Nobel Prize for that.
Incredible. I had no idea.
Oh, God, yeah. I have an interview where Walter Freeman is talking about how when people question Monitz about what he was doing, he'd say that there are plenty of Portuguese. I mean, so you get this kind of callousness that we see in the global predators on the videos when they're a little bit off guard or just frustrated. There is, human nature leaves a lot to be desired, and in a bad system, most people become bad, and in a good system, most people, I think, stay pretty good. And here's a question about it that I find very, very interesting, and maybe we could talk about it a little bit. To me, it is very obvious what the world needs. Basically, it was something that people had struggled over how to do it, and our founders in the U.S. came up with a system of checks and balances over democracy. So you have a democratic base where there are constitutional inhibitions on what can be done to individuals. We have a Bill of Rights. This system spread all over the world, all over Europe. Now we have it in Japan and to some extent India and other places around the world. And so far, we know that if you want world peace, literally no democracy, no functioning constitutional democracy has ever attacked another constitutional democracy. People try to say, oh, this happened or that happened, But by the time a country attacks a democracy, it is no longer a democracy. It's been taken over. It's a totalitarian state. Democracies don't have famines. There's just too much control that the people have over things, too much individuality, too much ability to grow food because it's not centralized. No democracy has ever done to its own people what Hitler or Mao or Stalin has done. It just doesn't happen because the people have enough control and there's enough protections. Sometimes the democracies totally break down, as happened with Hitler. And a lot of that was due, in fact, to the Western world, putting all these limits on the German people and putting all these financial stresses on the German people. I mean, the creation of Hitler has a hell of a lot to do with Western society after World War II. So it's complicated. But what we need to do is right now is to support constitutional democracy throughout the world, period. That's what we have to do. Now, there's other good things we can do, like, disclose who these violent people are who want to stop us, which is our specialties. But basically, that's what's needed in the world. And interestingly enough, if you read any of the globalist literature, it never gives serious discussion to constitutional republics or democracies. Never.
In fact, I think this is what Klaus Schwab wrote in either The Great Reset or the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In fact, one of four things, I forget which ones they are, but one of them is democracy, have to go. Globalization can stay. So that's what's happening. Globalization.
I can tell you exactly what he says. It's in COVID-19 and the global predators. He says that globalization is incompatible with a patriotic democracy, basically.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Because we won't put up we want to be Germany first, America first, which is, I believe, how it should be.
Of course.
And then you also organize to be charitable and caring about what's happening around the world. But first you have to be strong and you have to have a free people. You got to have a free people, relatively free. And everything that's happening in the world today is aimed at destroying constitutional democracies. That's another thing I want to just give your folks a chance to think about, because I don't think this is talked about very much. Everything that looks crazy to us systematically destroys constitutional democracies. So if you look at what is happening with Germany being the top contributor to the World Health Organization, the whole EU, which is a globalism of its own, the whole EU is one of the biggest supporters of giving up sovereignty of the individual nations to the World Health Organization.
Yes.
The EU was working on supporting the treaties that the World Health Organization is still trying to get through, treaties with individual countries that won't have to be approved by their senates or whatever, or like our U.S. Senate, because they'll call it an agreement instead of a treaty. To give up all sovereignty is supported by Germany and the U.S. and pretty much most of the major Western nations. So that's one piece of it, the treaties. The other piece of it is proposed by America, by Biden administration, a change to the amendments to the health regulations of the World Health Organization to remove all restraint off the activity of WHO, so that if it's even suspects that in your country something's brewing that's a threat to other countries, and it doesn't define, there's no limit on what it might think is brewing. It could be educational, it could be racial, it could be medical, because they believe all of those things come under WHO. They can now, if the amendments ever get passed, we stop them this first round.
But they're going to try again.
They're going to try again with the amendments. And so WHO then will be a dictator over a good chunk of sovereignty. Germany supports it. The EU loves it.
Yeah.
And so does our biggest agency, Health and Human Services. So that's the big thing that maybe people aren't speaking enough about in Europe or anywhere else, is this issue that they are out to destroy the constitutional democracies, the United States being the big target, of course, simply because of our power. And we have just about lost the United States right now. I mean, if we can't take back to some sort of a revived zombie Republican Party to take it back from the progressives, we will probably lose America in the next presidential round. We're pretty much losing it right now.
I agree with you. This is something that people have to understand. As far as Corona, or COVID is concerned, they have to understand that this is about life and death. This is not about some of the vaccines don't seem to work or breakthrough infections, which is a misnomer for vaccine failure, of course. But they have to understand that this is about life and death. They're trying to kill us off. That's definitely the case as far as I'm concerned over the, 400 plus interviews that we've done. This is the conclusion I have come to. And as far as democracy is concerned, you're absolutely right. Europe, this seems to be the eye of the storm. What's happening here cannot be seen by the people who are in the eye of the storm, except by some people who are part of the resistance. Mm-hmm. But it's easier to witness this from the outside. But this is the laboratory which they're using in order to create their first mini one world government. And if that works well, then they're going to take it one step further, because that first mini one world government will be the EU, which many people have gotten quite disgusted of in Europe, but for the wrong reasons. The right reason is they're taking away our democracy. They're taking away our sovereignty. That's why one after another of these Young Global Leaders program produced politicians, including Macron, is losing power. They are being thrown under the bus so that Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the EU Commission, can take over as their most important minion, their most important puppet to control Europe. I believe this is what's happening. But more and more people have gotten totally disgusted of what they're seeing, in particular the Eastern European countries, who do seem to remember better what a totalitarian system looks like than us Western European countries. So the outcome is not certain. I'm not sure if they're really on track with their agenda anymore. And as far as the U.S. is concerned, Peter, I hope it's a lot different there. From what I've seen, the last time I was there is in April, May, June. From what I've seen many more people than in Western Europe are not willing to go along with this any longer. I would estimate between 40 to 50% of the population, whereas here in Western Europe, it's probably between maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20% of the population.
Well, I think you're being too optimistic. One of the things that's happened here that we're talking about, Ginger and I. By the way, I want to say Ginger has a new column up. She and I do columns on a wonderful platform called America Out Loud. Mm-hmm. Peter McCullough's on it. Mm-hmm. We have a radio show that we do together. The only thing we've ever done together. It's this radio show we're doing on America Out Loud, and we do columns on America Out Loud. And by the way, to keep up with us, the best thing you can do is go to Breggin.com and get our frequent alerts. They're free. All right. They're called Breggin Alerts. And they'll tie you in. I've got a regular TV show that goes out as a radio show. Ginger and I have our own separate radio show. We're both doing columns. And Ginger's latest column that just went up today, and we got it up in time for this show because of the themes of this show, her column on AmericaOutloud.com is widespread damage to brain and heart, stop mRNA, quotation marks, vaccines and platforms.
Excellent. No, I'm very grateful for you taking the time and making this effort, because I think this is very, very important. And it's going to, a lot of people will now realize that they were not mistaken. They didn't imagine things, but rather people do get injured, do suffer brain damage, and it's very similar, if I'm not completely mistaken, to lobotomy.
To lobotomy, as it matures and spreads the effects throughout the brain, which happens, and very similar to electroshock treatment, which is a generalized brain attack, except you get more memory loss than people will get from the spikes. all brain damage tends to reduce us in a hierarchical way. First, getting love and affiliation and caring and moral restraints, and it just reduces the ability of the soul to communicate through the brain.
That's exactly how they're trying to destroy humanity.
You got it.
Humane thinking, empathy,
and thank
all that.
you for putting me on today. With Naomi, it's been a real pleasure to have that kind of interaction with her.
I very much enjoyed it, Peter, and I'm very, very grateful for you taking this opportunity to join us here.
I just feel really strongly about what you're doing, and whether you're in Germany or the U.S., I'd be happy to continue working with you.
Great. We will. Please say hi to Ginger, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Okay, take good care. Bye-bye. So this is the first segment of the new format, the International Crimes Investigative Committee, and I was honored and privileged to have had both Dr. Peter Breggin, probably the most important American psychiatrist, and Dr. Naomi Wolf with us today to discuss brain damage that's induced by the so-called vaccines, mRNA vaccines. We know they're not vaccines. We know they're neither necessary, nor are they effective, nor are they safe. Well, they are effective, but in a pretty much different way than most people think. Thank you very much for being with us. It was a pleasure. We'll see you next time.